So the first thing that we are going to look at is checking in materials. And I kind of pulled this out of the training and put it back in a different order because this really, if I am starting a new employee in my library, this is the first thing that I'm going to do with them to get them acclimated to just working within the client. It doesn't involve accessing patron records yet. It doesn't involve really anything beyond accessing the check-in screen. Now, there are, of course, some nuances to that we'll talk about. So to access the check-in interface, you're going to go to the circulation menu and click on check-in. Or you can just go under the circulation and patrons category and again, click the link that says check-in. And it's going to take you to this interface that looks very similar to the one that we saw for the grid management thing. That was the item status screen. This is the check-in screen. It's characterized by a barcode field. And this is generally where you're going to scan your barcodes, and you can also free type in there. So it is, your scanner of course acts a little bit like a keyboard, but that's another conversation. And then over to the far right, you will see that there is an effective date and a calendar picker over there to the far right in that field. And then we have the grid, as well as some things below that, the print, receipt, term list, strict barcode, and then check-in modifiers, which we'll get there. So the first thing for this theoretical employee is they're just going to practice scanning barcodes into the barcode field, or you can type them, and that's going to pull up the records for those items. It's going to change their status from whatever they were to reshelving generally, with some exceptions that we'll get to. And it's going to then display some information about each of those items here. Now, one thing that may happen is that you may need to check items in and have them reflected in the system as having been checked in previously at an earlier date. And this could happen for a variety of reasons, some more common than others. In order to do this, and this is called backdating, you're going to utilize the date picker over at the effective date. And I don't actually have the screen open here, but I think I'm going to open an instance of, let's pop in here, back here. I really like to go into the production database and show you these things. So you're going to open the date picker, and then if I pick a date prior to today's date, it's going to then give me a notification up here saying, now anything that I check in this screen is going to be checked in. The check-in date will be this back date. That's going to affect say that this item that I theoretically have in my hand was due yesterday. We'll say that it was actually due on Monday, so that we get our grace period all taken care of. And now I have some money that I owe, but for whatever reason, that we are actually going to backdate that to the 22nd so that when it's checked in, it doesn't reflect as being checked in as overdue and no money is actually charged for that. No fines are charged for that. So you saw I actually turned one of these off. Another option that you have in the check-in interface are these things called check-in modifiers. And look at them a little closer. When these are selected, it's going to cause some additional actions or behaviors to be included with that check-in. So those triggers that might have been triggered when you checked something in are going to be changed a little bit. So if we think about the amnesty mode, if I turn that on, and actually that I picked that one and it's not one that we recommend that you use without heavy consideration, that is going to keep any fines or fees from being applied to items that are checked in. Now that's any fines or fees. It's not just overdue. It is a complete amnesty. There are some ways around that as well, but it's going to do that. Another one that is frequently turned on at circulation desks is to auto print the hold and transit slips. When we are dealing with our holds maintenance, is something we'll talk about tomorrow, maybe selecting this clear holds shelf. Something that we have used here in the state library recently, it's actually ongoing, is using the update inventory check-in modifier to do inventory of some collections. So there are some options there for these check-in modifiers. You can see that if I select one, again, that's going to, or two, those are going to be reflected up in the check-in items interface with this red bar, just to get your attention and say, hey, there is a check-in modifier that has been enabled for this. As we are dealing with lost and missing items, there is another feature that comes into play here. When you check in something that was marked lost or missing, you are going to get an alert that says item was marked lost or item was marked missing. And then you can click OK and continue, or you can cancel it and that is not going to, it's not going to be checked in. Now, in this case, this is a lost item, and you can see that now we have begun a fine tally as well as a statement saying how much money was billed for that transaction. So the fine tally is going to keep a record of the accumulated fines within that check-in interface, that within the grid, so that if you say you close the check-in screen and then you reopen it, your tallies are going to start over. The transactions is just going to be for that specific one that was just scanned in. It was just entered into the interface. You can see a closer look at that there. Of course, there is also the balance owed. Now, you don't necessarily have to have the balance owed column visible. So if it was not activated to be in this display view, you would still see for that top transaction any monies that had been billed for that, and then also the fine tally for the things in the interface. And then you also have within the check-in interface the option to do actions on selected items. In this case, you can see that this book has been, the record here, this item record has been selected, and what that then happens, and I'm going to go back and see here if we can see in this screen, pay no attention to the orange box, you can see that the actions menu that's just above the grid over to the right hand side, it is light gray, so it has not yet been activated. Now when an item is selected in the grid, it activates that actions menu. You can now click that down arrow and it's going to give you a variety of tasks that you can do related to that item that has been selected. This, you're going to see the actions menu in just about, well, in every grid view. Everywhere there's a grid, whether it involves user records or item records, if it populates a grid, there will be an actions menu. The actions that are available to you in that menu are not always going to be the same. So as a heads up for that. Okay, any questions about the check-in interface? I will say too, I am not an expert on all of the things that the check-in modifiers do. Some of them I have utilized a lot. I want to pop back there real quickly. Specifically as we have been dealing with COVID and the impact that it's had on our libraries and how they're circulating things. Those things like capturing local holds as transits, some libraries have utilized that. Suppress holds in transits, those have been utilized in some ways. So check-in modifiers have become an important part, if they weren't before, of how we're dealing with those materials that are being returned from patrons that maybe they check them out pre-COVID, or now as we're dealing with quarantining